next up, I am really excited to introduce Katie McLaughlin, who is going to be talking about moving from learning management to potential performance consultancy and other spaces within the learning area. So Katie is joining me on stage. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing great. How are you, Tina?
From Seattle, right? Everything's
Yes.
good up there. The smoke is clearing.
Yes. And we're having a typical gray, rainy Seattle day, which is lovely.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'll still be monitoring the chat, the general chat, for any questions that might come in, and I will see you at the end. And hopefully you're able to share your slides. Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good lunchtime, wherever you happen to be in the world today. So glad to be here. I'm grateful for all the presenters, and especially that last conversation about, how do we develop our skill set and what tools are available. So thank you for that. Today, of course, we're talking about going from a learning manager to potential or performance consultancy. And before we get started, I want to just share, my own, just kidding, bringing the slides back on. Oh, technology. Let's see. All right. So I'll share a little bit about myself. My name is Katie McLaughlin, and I have founded a consultancy called the McLaughlin Method. I'm going to put this link back up at the end, but I have a free offer for all of you around how to build some skills that were even just talked about, like change management. So that'll come up at the end. And so who am I? Well, first of all, I'm an artist. I have a theater background. I took that and then started coaching folks in just kind of in the workplace, connecting with others, seeing people who were developing new skills and who were peers. And, from there, that's what helped me kind of get into a, kind of more official facilitation role within the company that I was working for. And I know there's many job seekers out there, so I find it sometimes helpful to learn how people got where they are, right? And I spent a lot of years as a facilitator and then moved into training management roles and curriculum design. And what I also found that was really helpful in my career was getting involved in strategy. I knew that I could design better training if I better understood what the business needed, what was happening in the business, and if I could align myself to the business strategy. And we'll be talking a little bit about that today. And then the last role that I had was as a consultant, as a change management consultant. And so all of those things are coming into my career in my own business. And I didn't necessarily get a different degree in order to be able to transition through these different roles, but I was constantly learning. I was constantly updating my skill set and my tool set. So I want to know, who are you? So we are going to be using an interactive tool called Mgmt. And at the top there, you can see that you can pull out your phone, and Tina's putting it in the chat too, that if you pull out your phone and bring up a browser window, you can go to menti.com and enter this code. And this is a tool that you can use in your virtual world these days. But it's a great tool to be able to get people interacting. And that's the kind of facilitator I am. It's so hard that I can't see anybody right now. But so I at least want to know that you're out there and that you're responding. So please pull out your phones, go to menti.com and enter that code. And then you'll see the question, the same question, and you'll just answer that. Aha, okay, there we go. Some answers coming in. I always love to know who's in my audience, right? Who am I speaking to? That's a really important part of our skill set, is knowing who are we talking to, who's involved. I'll just give you a few more moments to get yourself set up and logged in here. It looks like we have a lot of folks who feel like they're more in that learning manager role. And you've noticed that I've added some caveats here. if you're like myself and got laid off during this time, and that's actually what kind of became the springboard for me to start my own business. But you can also just take your most recent role. And there's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just curious where everybody's at. Alrighty, so I'm not seeing anything else moving or adjusting, but it does seem like we have a lot of folks who are in more of that learning manager role today, or are developing training, facilitating training. So, I'm curious then, where are you or where were you spending the most of your time at work? And, there's going to be some questions on your phone, again, asking you to fill out a couple of words or a short phrase. No wrong answers. Really just curious, where are you spending your time? What activities, what tasks? And you can just do a couple of keywords here. It doesn't have to be a novel. And make sure you hit submit so we can see it. It will give you a chance to enter them again. So you could always just even enter one. You don't have to think of 3. Yeah. So this is called a word cloud. So it's looking for things that are the same and seeing where kind of more answers are coming up. Yeah, so a lot of time facilitating, a lot of time in meetings. I think we all know the kind of meeting overload that many of us are experiencing. But I'm also seeing a lot of other interesting things relating to like learning development, editing video, creating training plans, project management. Awesome. Great. So it's important that we're aware of where we're spending our time, right? Especially if we're thinking about the evolution of our role, we have to be aware of where's my role kind of sitting right now, or where maybe are my skills being used today? And maybe they're only being used in kind of a singular or, kind of very narrow focus. That's what tends to happen when we're in a role for a long time, or when we think that we have to stay in the bounds of like our job description. And what I really want to challenge everybody today is that I believe that any learning professional can be a performance consultant, can deal with change management, because it's all actually very similar in terms of what knowledge and skills we have to have. But it just may be that we're not seeing ourselves that way. And we may not be using our skills in the way that we think we need to. Or we might just have a little imposter syndrome. I know I first had that when I transitioned into my change management consultant role, where I thought, oh gosh, I don't know anything about change management. But then as I started to do some research, and I realized, no, I can use all of my learning background here for change management and helping people to adapt to change. So I want you to think now about how your organization sees you, or your past organization. What labels or terms would they use to define the value that you bring to the organization, or to define what activities you're doing every day? And again, this is not from your perspective or from anybody else in the talent space, I would say. I would encourage you to think about executive leaders or managers of other organizations. How do they see you? And I've gotten some photos here as inspiration, but I want to hear from you. Just like that last question, there'll be a new question on your phone. So what are some labels or terms that you think your organization would use or has used to describe your role? And especially since many of you are in more of a learning manager role, I'm really curious what words your organization would use. Yeah, and if you're struggling to think of words, feel free to use the words that are on screen for inspiration. If you kind of want to plus one of those answers or those words that really feel relevant to you, type the same words into your phone so we can see those go up. Yeah, see, this is where I was thinking we might head. This whole notion of being an order taker. I think that many of us, if you've been in any presentation about your role in the workplace and the value of learning, you've probably gone to some kind of presentation that says we have to be more than an order taker. And we have to be more than just doing administrative work. Oh, this really interesting word there, tentative. That's not a word I usually associate with someone who also is in a training role. So that's a really good awareness and insight. So I want you to kind of think about this. Feel free to answer in the chat, but I want you to find out, do you think that the value you provide is as an order taker? If you do, then that's where your first work needs to come as a learning professional who may be interested in evolving your role, is to start changing your mindset. How can you get out of the role of an order taker? Because order takers are replaceable. Order takers are expendable. But strategic partners, creators, creative thinkers, I'm seeing other great words, solutionists, people who are innovative, those are the people who are less expendable, right? Now, with COVID, many of us are experiencing layoffs, and we can't control the way that an organization really sees us, but we can control the actions we're taking within an organization. We can control how we're showing up, right? So because I see the word tentative on there, that may be a reflection of how you're showing up in the workplace today. And I would imagine that you don't want to be seen that way, right? So when I think about facilitating, I'm always thinking about action. So what actions can I take in order to change, in order to learn, in order to grow, right? So those are two areas to start thinking about. What actions can you take that would cause you to not appear tentative, but for you to appear capable and a go-to person, right? And that would allow you to not just appear as an order taker. And I started to kind of talk a little bit about like why do we need to evolve as people? But if we think about why our role needs to evolve in the workplace, part of it is also that it's for our entire ecosystem. Any of us who are seen as an order taker, that hurts all of us who are in those roles in our organization. Because ultimately, when companies are choosing to do a layoff or who to hire, who to expand into different areas, they are going to take with them all of their kind of preconceived notions, their bias around what does a learning manager do. And so we have to be evolving, even if our role title is not evolving. We have to constantly be showing that value. And we're going to talk a little bit more today about how we can do that. And I also just want to remind you that it's not just about technical knowledge in your evolution. You need to evolve in terms of how you're connecting with the people in your workplace. And there's a great piece of feedback being added in the chat here about sometimes the workplace needs to evolve to accept you. And you're absolutely right. But I just want to remind everybody here that there's only so much that we have control over, right? We can only control ourselves, the actions we're taking, the things that we're doing in the workplace. We ultimately can't control someone else's mindset, but we can be persuasive. We can demonstrate value. And we can continue to talk up the value that we're taking in. I didn't ask this question, but there's definitely a big difference between how women and men respond in the workplace. And that may also be a layer of complexity to how you're being viewed in the workplace, as well as with race, right? There's a lot of different things that may impact how you're being viewed, but you can impact the actions you take and how you contribute. So now I want us to kind of put on our like learning manager, curriculum developer, performance consultant hats here and think about the skills that a learning manager needs in order to be successful versus the skills that a performance consultant needs to be successful. So back to your phones. The next question should be up on your phones. So what skills does a learning manager need to be successful? Now, if you need some ideas or thoughts on how you could phrase this, go back to your knowledge of behaviors, your knowledge of writing a learning objective. All of that can be helpful in documenting a skill, right? So this is something that you could demonstrate or could be measured in some way. Again, no wrong answers. What else? Awesome. And if you happen to just be joining us, make sure you get on your phones go to menti.com and put in the code at the top. And you can add in, there's a free open text field. You can add in your additional thoughts here on what skills you need. Okay, so there's some really interesting things coming up on screen here. Communications, emotional intelligence, I love that. Project management. Decision-making, yep. Business impact understanding, business acumen. I love seeing that. I don't frequently see that when people are thinking about their role, that they may think they only have to rely on a subject matter expert. And I would challenge that perspective, because if we're relying on our subject matter experts to be entirely right all the time, then we aren't actually able to consult. We're not able to help them see. Someone mentioned like that they might ask for a burger, but they really need chicken nuggets. I think that's a really awesome description that, as a learning manager, the part of the way we get out of being an order taker is by better understanding the business. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So we've talked about what a learning manager needs to be successful. Now I want you to think about a performance consultant. What skills does a performance consultant need in order to be successful? What would they need to demonstrate? What could we measure? And these also could be things that you might see on a job description. So maybe think about that. If you're somebody who's a job seeker, have you seen any particular skills being listed on a job description? And again, make sure you bring your phone back up. I see that we've got some answers coming in, but make sure you get on there or get on your browser window, another browser window in your video, in your computer life. I've got so many devices set up today so I could have everything at my fingertips. Connected to industry trends, problem identification, cause analysis, asking the right questions. Yeah, what else? Are there other things that a performance consultant needs to be able to demonstrate? Interesting. So I want to take a little bit from what I'm seeing here and translate that from a a statement about a fact as opposed to a skill. So you'll see on the far left, it says copious reference materials. Well, that's not a skill. That is something I can acquire, right? I could buy them, but it doesn't tell me whether or not I could demonstrate use of those skills, of those resources, right? I could have all the reference materials in the world, but if I don't know when I should go look at them, if I don't know what value that particular reference material has, then it's kind of worthless. So as you're thinking, even in your current role, if you're still in a learning manager role and not in a performance consultant role, we all should be thinking about learning outcomes or the outcomes of any of our business activities. I've been using Bloom's taxonomy to write learning objectives or business outcomes for any problem, essentially. There's always some kind of skill associated with every role and every kind of interaction, right? So I just want to encourage you all to think about, are we talking here at all about skills, or is there maybe a quality, right? On the previous screen, there was something about patience. Well, how could we see or observe that someone was patient? That's the kind of mindset we need to start getting into when we really think about consulting on performance, and we really think about not just being kind of an order taker, right? We've got to start thinking about how do we transform the way that we think. So great stuff being shared here. So as we kind of reflect on what we saw here, can we transfer some of the skills from one role to the next? And I want to say yes. I was actually really impressed with some of the skills that came up under Learning Manager, because many of those skills, and I'm just going to jump back there so we can take a look at it, that several of these skills might apply even more to being a learning manager. So consulting, identifying the desired business outcomes to align learning programs. You have to do that as a performance consultant as well. As a performance consultant, you have to have business acumen, because you can't have a fruitful conversation if you can't keep up, right? If you don't understand what they're talking about. Now, I'm not saying you have to become a subject matter expert. That is not what you need to do, but you need to take some time to do some of your own learning, not just on skill development, but on knowledge development, right? Understanding what they're even talking about. So, listening skills, understanding needs, communications and emotional intelligence, all of that, absolutely. And I would also just challenge that we don't necessarily need to throw by the wayside our project management skills in a performance consultant type role, because as a performance consultant, you're likely to still develop some trainings, right? And so again, mindset shift here. I'm not saying you have to have a different job title within your organization, but you already have many of these skills that you're demonstrating. You may even be demonstrating them today, or you can go even further to demonstrate them. So that way your business doesn't think about you as being tentative. So they don't think about you as an order taker, that they really start to see you as that strategic partner. So my answer is yes, we can absolutely transfer many of those skills from one role to the next. So a couple of questions for you to think about and reflect on for yourself is, how do I partner with the business? A thought there would be, are you waiting for them to come to you? One key way that I would be more of a partner in the business was that I would go to a all hands meeting. That was a common thing at many of the companies that I've worked at. I would go to an all hands meeting and I would try to think about where are the business gaps and where could I help support? I also would just kind of go to team meetings, hear what they're talking about, learn, what their priority set is. And that's also a really great way to observe others and see what skills they might lack, right? If you're observing a team meeting, which might typically be led by a manager, you could also observe them and see, wow, this manager isn't able to communicate very specifically. They're not great at setting expectations. Well, that could be a training, right? It could be, or it could be coaching. But that's one way that we start to think more as a performance consultant, that there are learning opportunities everywhere. There are blockers to people's performance everywhere. So let's think about the company you work for now or your most recent employer. And it doesn't matter if your role was even in the learning field, but what are or were one or two of your company's big focus areas? And again, not anything related to learning necessarily, unless that was like a big priority, but this would be something that they might share at an all hands meeting, or that you might hear about. So make sure you bring your phone back out and go back to this new question, because I want to know, what is your business focused on right now? And it doesn't have to be anything official. It could be fairly generic, like increase sales. That's a common one that many companies are trying to do. Digitization. The person who wrote learning culture, I would encourage you to ask yourself, is that a priority you have, or is that actually a priority of your entire company? Generally, our learning priorities are not always the highest priorities for your whole business. If your priority as an organization is learning culture, I want to work there, right? Who doesn't want to work at a company where learning culture is one of like the top 3 business goals? Yeah, cost reduction, avoiding layoffs. Digitization is an interesting one. Cool. I love that, Tina, that learning culture is part of your organizational priorities. That's awesome. Increased efficiencies, being the best place to work. That's awesome. I want to work there too. Cloud first. Yeah, cost savings, growth, profit. Great. So it doesn't actually matter what these priorities are, but I want us to now start thinking about, well, first of all, if you're in the learning profession, you should be able to answer these. You should be able to answer this question. You should be able to know, here are the top 3 priorities that our organization is working towards, because that's going to influence what avenues you could go down to support. And it's going to be able to help you better articulate the value you're providing. If you know that, one of the big areas that people are looking to improve in is around, profit or increasing sales, improved customer service, you'll need to have likely some kind of learning opportunity. And a reminder that whenever we say learning, that more and more, we're also talking about those informal learning activities that we could still design and we could still enable as learning managers, as performance consultants. It's not just about, can we build a cool e-learning, right? So I want us to kind of break down a couple of these. So if we think about, if a company is interested in increasing revenue, which could also mean increasing profit, I saw on the previous one, we can start to unpack that and think about, okay, so if the company wants to increase revenue, who's involved, right? So who could actually take action to increase revenue, right? Well, in some organizations, it could be raising prices, right? In other organizations, it's likely going to be sales, right? Where the salespeople could sell more. That's a possible way to drive increased revenue. It could be that there's a focus in the company on decreasing churn, which churn means that you're losing customers as opposed to retaining those customers. So maybe that's where the focus is. But there's not a kind of one-to-one, like, oh, increased revenue always means we need training for sales, right? What we hear here is the ability to dig deeper, to ask some questions. And whether that's asking your leader, like the talent leader, or whether that's going to someone else in the organization and asking them some questions. Who's involved? Where do you think the gaps are? So that's where we start using our consultative skills before they're even asked, before we're asked to come and create a training. Because if somebody has gotten to the stage of thinking, oh, Katie, I need a training, they have already kind of self-selected that this is what they want, right? And as opposed to if we're going to them and being part of the thinking process, we're going to all get better results. And we're going to be able to step more out of that order taking role. And you're going to be proactive. You're not going to appear as tentative if you are actually going to them and having a conversation. So a couple other questions you might want to think about could include, what's happening today? What's our desired outcome? And then thinking about where's the performance gap. I know that in the learning roles, we talk about where's the learning gap, but I want to just encourage you to change your vocabulary. Where's the performance gap? Because if we're thinking only about it being a learning gap, then we're likely to probably go even more towards, oh, they need a specific knowledge. They need some content thrown at them, rather than thinking about what does it take someone to perform? So what does it take a salesperson in order to perform? Well, they have to be able to ask good discovery questions. They need to be able to articulate the value proposition, things like that. So start shifting your thinking to where's the performance gap, and let that inform your training design. So the last bit of our talk today, I want to talk about potential. So, the title of this session was switching from learning manager to performance or potential consultancy. So how could we be a consultant of potential? And when I think about this word, I also think of what's possible. So what's possible? Well, anything could be possible. So that I would encourage you to think about potential in that positive light, that anything could be possible. And this is where we need to put on that creative thinking cap and start thinking about transferring skills from one place to another. And that's something that we have to do as learning professionals, but we also need to be able to design the learning that will help people in our organization to see their own potential and to start transferring their skills. So, that could go with when people change roles or through promotions, or, many folks may be transitioning industries. And it's really important that when we think about potential, we also have to think about the perceived value that someone thinks they have. And if any of you are StrengthsFinder fans out there, one of my top 5 is positivity. So you'll see that I am trying to put a positive spin on all of this, right? But, when we're going through things like layoffs, or, where our jobs are eliminated, it's really easy for us to think about that in a negative light, right? And of course, we are gonna feel things, right? We are gonna have some emotions that come up as a result of job loss, or, if we're in an industry where a layoff is happening because the company is pivoting and going in a different direction, then there may be some perception that I don't have value, right? Or and that could be from you as a learning professional. It could also be from the people who get laid off, right? Who need to kind of pivot and switch industries or change careers. And all of the skills that you have, I argue that you don't lose them. They might go dormant sometimes. We may need to re-up. But if any of you have read Make It Stick, you'll know that the act of forgetting and then relearning is even more powerful for making that learning stick. For your brain starts to realize, oh, I forgot this. It's coming up again. So it must be important. So that means that the skill is still there and that we can trigger our minds to remember. So, and remember it in more detail for the long term. So I want you to think about, feel free to add in the chat here, what's the big blocker to seeing potential? Any thoughts here? I kind of gave it a little bit away in what I was sharing before, what I was trying to articulate. Your organization's culture and norms, absolutely. Self-doubt, 100%. We're already kind of rocking and rolling in that avenue. And so I understand that an earlier speaker talked about the change curve. I'm a huge proponent of thinking about change curves. This one is based off of the Kubler-Ross change curve. And this has been a cornerstone for how I started to transition into change management. And that is the emotional component that happens with change. It's not just about what skills do I need and do I have them and where do I go to get them? It's what is going to block learning. And I was reading a study that looked at like the neurology around learning. And there were studies done that showed that emotions block learning. And if any of you have felt in this time when we've all been going under huge stress, that, it also can block our reasoning. Things that feel rational, we aren't able to access when we're in that emotional space. So as we start to really think about how can we consult on potential of others, how can we consult on the performance, and how could we help people to transition, we have to think about the fact that people are going through this life cycle of emotion and will want to use different responses to folks depending on where they're located on this change curve. If someone is going through denial right now, they might need to see a demonstration, and in order to start seeing that the change is happening, right? If you've said, oh, we're going to provide you with resources, and there's no resources that have come out, well, then that could be this blaming self, blaming others, denial, etc. And we have to watch for, I think probably many of us, I know I have gone through this low dip in response to how our world has changed post-COVID-19. But it's only once we get there that we can start to accept and that we can start to go back up this climb. And on the left side, it says performance, which is a great thing for us to think about. But I also want us to think about that in terms of confidence too, right? Going back up the scale. And so we have to be that voice of positivity within the company and within our ecosystem. So that way people know that there is more ahead, that we could take our skills and put them elsewhere, right? So I encourage you to really think about, how can I be a better human when it comes to helping others to respond to change? That's first and foremost the biggest blocker, I believe, to people seeing their own potential, that they really need someone who will level with them, who won't ignore their emotions. I know many companies, when thinking about a layoff or thinking about cutbacks, may not respond in the most humane or emotionally intelligent way, right? So, but you, again, have the power to be some of that change within your organization and within the ecosystem. How can we pick ourselves back up after a loss? Because any type of change represents some kind of loss. And we're all experiencing change all the time, and we need to support each other through that. So I want you to do a little self-check-in right now. Are there any things that you want to start shifting in your life, in yourself? Is it an action? And I'm going to use another retention tool right now, and I want you to write it down. So get out a piece of paper and a pen, write down what's one action that you could take after this session to start to shift your mindset, start to build a new skill set, start to make yourself more marketable. If you're out there looking for a job, feel free to write it in the chat if you'd like, but I really recommend that you write it down on paper. So take a moment, think about that action item. And I want you to catch yourself. If there are times or even during this talk where you've thought, that's not my job, or some other negative absolute here, that's where some of your work is to start shifting that if I can do it, you can do it. What any human is capable of doing, so are all of us, maybe not to the same extent, but we all have a lot more alike than we do have different. So you could change that mindset too. And like in the last session, make sure you're sharpening your tool set. So as part of, as part of this, I wanted to help you all do that even more than today. And so I've crafted a 4-part video series focusing on some key skills that we all need in order to be more marketable, in order to be able to be a better learning partner, be a performance consultant. So I really encourage you to go to bit.ly/MM, case is important here, free videos, and just fill out a quick little form and I'll send that off to you. So
that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie, for the resource. I love that it's connected to change management as well. That seems to be a recurring theme for us.
It does. It does. Yeah, no, I was impressed that came up as an earlier topic as well, knowing I'd already designed this training. So
yes, I think we have one question come in, but since we've run out of time, I'll just ask Alwyn if he can reach directly out to you.
Okay, great.
For any further question. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you.